Hello and welcome to ESL Revolution, everyone. I am your content creator and professor, Dr. B. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. It has been a while since I've done an actual video, I think about a week maybe, so I figure it was time to get one done. I've been producing a lot of videos for my university students, and those are in an unlisted section of the channel geared specifically to you or to them if you happen to be watching. However, I haven't uploaded one for about a week or so. That is a general ESL or ELL or EFL discussion video. So I thought we would put one together today. So here we go. All right. So today I want to talk to you about an ESL. This is in the hints and tips section of the video, but it's more of a commentary, I think. And I'm relying on some specific research actually on this. So I'm going to be focusing on my screen a little bit while I come back to you, because I don't want to make a mistake as I am engaged in you and engaged in the material. And this does it follows in with what we already talked about in the tips and hints of ESL or EFL learning, is the idea of understanding our fear. And boop, I will put that right up there and link it to you. But there is more going on in terms of our ability to use a language than simply fear. That can be a part of it, but it is not the only part. And today I want to talk about a second aspect, which I believe I alluded to in the first video. But really I want to focus down and dig down into this particular issue as we review it today. And in a very general way, this video involves the idea of culture and how culture, especially between East and West, how culture plays a role not just in an ESL format, but also a general learning format. In other words, there are very big differences in the way that individuals in predominantly Asian countries, as opposed to predominantly Western countries, that engage learning in a very, very different way. Because there are cultural foundations that exist in those two culture groups that provide an unwritten rule, I guess, an unwritten rule or an unspoken rule about how people learn. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the idea of individual versus collective, because this is one area that is uniquely different between East and West. So let me talk about those first. First of all, we've got to describe, or we have to define, what individualism and collectivism is in order to understand the way that it relates to learning and education particularly. So what is individualism? Well, I'm going to read this directly because I think it's a good quote and it deserves to be shouted out. So, individualism holds that the individual is the primary unit of reality and the ultimate standard of value. This view does not deny that societies exist or that people benefit from living in them. but it sees society as a collection of individuals, not something over above them. And this comes from multiple forms of research. So I'm reading something from the research here. So let me break this down a little bit. Let me make it very simplified, I guess. So in Western culture, we have the idea of the individual. And the individual is autonomous, and they are a unit. And in a society, we have many different individuals and many different units. Society still exists, they still group together, but individuals are seen as fundamentally necessary for the way that society or culture functions. And we can see this when we go back into Western philosophy, into the Enlightened period, where we have, among others, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, etc. All of these big giants of Western philosophy and individualism. Of course, we have things like the Declaration of Independence in the United States comes out of that individualistic tradition. Okay? So that's more the Western side of things. Now, what about the Eastern or Asian side of things? And that is collectivism. Okay? Collectivism, and again, I'm going to read from the article here. Collectivism holds that the group, the nation, the community, the race, the family, is the primary unit of reality, and it is the ultimate standard of value. Again, this view does not deny the reality of the individual, but collectivism holds that one's identity is determined by the groups that they interact with. And one's identity constituted essentially relationships with others. Okay, now let me break that down again for you. Okay, so we have the idea that the individual is not autonomous from the group, but rather is a necessary part of the group. Okay, so my identity is related to the groups that I am engaged with. So whether it's the national group, whether it's a community group, whether it's a racial group, because sometimes, like in Korea, for example, you have Korea is very much of a single race culture, and so that also has a way of explaining identity. Okay, and collectivism holds that one's identity is determined by the way that you interact. So your group, your role in the group, your group, and you might have multiple different groups around you. All of those provide input into your identity as an individual. Okay? It does not, again, like individualism, does not deny the group. Collectivism does not deny the individual, but it puts one at slightly more importance than the other. Okay? So that's the first thing that we need to think about when we are reflecting upon cultural issues in relation to learning. Now, let me scroll down a little bit, because in education specifically, there are some aspects of education in an individual way, and there are aspects of education in a collective way. So let's look at the individual first, the individualism. And we could say that this is primarily of US culture, but we ought not to limit just to US culture. That would include any Western country. Anything in Western Europe, England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the US, of course. That would be more like Western identity, right? So, one of the things that is different with regard to culture and individualism and learning, one thing is that there is a sense that one must foster an independent and individual achievement. All right? So we are focused on what one individual can do, and we are trying to create people that can interact with the world on an independent platform. They don't need a lot of reliance necessarily on the group in order to engage with the world. However, on the flip side, collectivism typically engages in more interdependence, and of course, the idea of individual success versus group success. Okay, individual versus group success. And that's a key factor here between individualism and collectivism. The second aspect is the idea of self-expression in the individualistic mindset, okay? That self-expression, individual thinking, personal choice, the idea of me-ness is very, very important in a Western mindset in terms of education. On the flip side, we have education that has specific rules, specific norms that one must adhere to. So, for example, in Korea, we have definitely this idea of junior versus senior. Okay, we see that all through levels of education. Doesn't matter how young you are or how old you are. It permeates the workplace in a big way, okay? So we have this me-ness of individualness, and we have the we-ness of collectivism. A third point in terms of education and culture is the idea of egalitarian relationships. That means that, let's say for me and you, as a teacher, I do not see myself above you as a student. Because that means that I would have nothing to learn from you. But that's not the case. There are many instances in my career as a teacher where the students, in fact, were able to give me some aha moments that I could learn from their experience and from those conversations and dialogues. So there is a flexibility in terms of the way that we see our interaction together. On the flip side, we have collectivism, where it is more this way, right? It is more vertical. There's very much a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy amongst gender. There's a hierarchy amongst family, amongst students to teachers, amongst students that are younger and older. Okay? That's all hierarchy. And because of that, there's a huge difference between the way you as Korean students, and I'm going to use the Korean context here, that you as Korean students would see me, but I would see you very differently. The relationship between teacher to student, in my mind and in the way that I culturally understand that, is very different from the way that you understand it. Okay? The best way of describing this is Western culture is student-focused, has student-focused learning, whereas Asian culture and Korea in specifically is still very focused on teacher-centered learning. In other words, the teacher is the giver of knowledge, and the students are simply to take it in. Western education doesn't work that way. It is more conversational, it is more dialogical, it is more interactive. Okay, so keep that in mind also. Now, there's 3 more points here. In kind of that individualistic side again, individual students will speak up in the class when called upon personally by the teachers. So it could be that if I'm in a class, and you would probably experience this, right? The teacher is going to call, the NET, Native English teacher, is going to call out an individual to provide a specific answer. However, in Korean culture and Asian culture, communal culture, individual students will speak up in class in response to a general invitation by the teacher. In other words, if I was a teacher and I'd say, who can give me the answer? Okay, who can give me the answer? As opposed to, Ms. Kim, can you give me the answer? Okay, so there's a different interaction there as well. Now, in another aspect of individual versus collective learning is that neither the teacher nor any student should ever be made to lose face. Okay? It means that the way that we interact, we are respectful of the other individual. We will challenge, we will question, we will try to draw out information, but we will do so in a respectful way. However, there is the idea of and I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, of kamyun. Kamyun is face consciousness. That's the only way to really describe that. That the idea that we don't want to point somebody out. We don't want them, if they don't know the answer, we are just, okay, don't worry about it. We don't want them to lose face. Therefore, if we don't want them to lose face, we're not going to have any kind of interaction. As an ESL class where conversation is fundamental to the way that we do things, this is something that we're going to really need to work on, because conversation is going to occur in the classroom whether you like it or not. Now, the last thing is the idea, and this is general, that property rights, the idea of property is owned by the individual, whereas in collectivism you have property and group ownership. Now, that has less to do with the educational setting per se, but it is a part of that individual versus collective mindset. Okay? Now, those are some areas that we can think about in relation to the individual mind versus the collective mind. Now, I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to go on too long with this, because actually I think that's a good point to stop after those 6. Now, what I want you to do is think about, okay, if these are the differences between the collective and the individual, what is the relationship with that to education? Now, I've alluded to some of those things, but I think it's important that you figure this out, because when you do that, it's going to have an effect on how you engage the EFL environment. Okay? I hope that helps. We're going to keep going with this article in future ESL tips and hints videos, because I think this is really interesting, and there's some unique dynamics that we will be talking about in the near future. And with that in case, hit the notification button, hit that bell, bing, and you will see the updates as they come in on Wednesday and on Friday. Thank you very much, everybody, my students here in Korea, or if you're overseas, to you as well. Thank you very much for joining me today. And remember, as always, be the revolution. Peace.